Much, Mara. I'm actually going to now, I'm going to share a copy of the source sheet for today. I'm going to give everyone a chance as long as I can get the copy. And I'm going to put it in the chat for everyone so you can be able to view. It's right over here.
Great.
And so you should be able to view it. Okay. So if anybody has any questions about it, feel free. And I'm making the source sheet public, so you should be able to see it now. So this is a parsha that has a lot of good stuff to it. We could really be here for a very long time to be able to talk about everything having to do with this Torah portion. It is the story of the great flood and how God saved humanity through Noah. We could talk about how is Noah a righteous person and how the rabbis understand that. What exactly is all about the flood? Why did God do the flood? The different metaphors for what it means to survive life, the numbers involved in this Torah portion, the genealogies. There really is so much to talk about, let alone the Tower of Babel, which happens at the end of the Parsha, kind of just almost like thrown in there. But I actually kind of want to talk about Noah in the larger scheme of things. And unfortunately, I don't have this chart for you, but I want you to think about if you were to take the entire Torah. We just did this actually in our shul on Simchat Torah, and some shuls do this, where you take the entire Torah and you spread it out, almost like nafutz or lishrotz, like to spread out the entire Torah around the congregation to see just how long it is and how big it is. You have an incredible number of columns, an incredible number of words. There's actually approximately 79,000 or 80,000 words in all of Torah. But then if we think about, okay, what are those all those words about? If you break it down into, let's say, three categories. One, the story of creation, God creating everything. And two, the story of humanity, of our journey as human beings. And then the story of Israel, the story of the Jewish people, but really the children of Abraham, the children of Israel. The word Jewish does not appear in the text itself. So just talking about this one tribe. And I want you to, maybe if you want to put it into the chat, what percentage of the Torah do you think actually deals with the Israelite story as opposed to the creation story or the story of humanity? And I would guess, if you're putting it into the messages, I'm not sure, I don't see them right now, that it's very, very, very high around the story of the Israelites. In fact, this Torah portion is really the end of the story of humanity, and then we begin the story of this certain people. Now, why would the Torah be of interest for centuries and to millions, to billions of people if it was just a story about a single group, a single people? There must be something in Torah that connects what is in this text that seemingly is just really about one people to the larger story of humanity and the world itself. And actually, that's kind of what I want to talk about through the lens of Noah, because Noah is, I believe, the link between how we start with this story of God as the God of creation, the God of everyone, the God of everything, and then move into a primary story of God as the God of this unique people, and how Noah makes the link between those two. Or to put it in another way, there is a verse in Deuteronomy that is very well known in Jewish circles of the Shema. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. The Lord of, listen, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. One interpretation of that is that there's two ways of viewing God. Adonai Eloheinu, the Lord is our God, our unique God. But that Lord who is our unique God is also the God of everything, the God of the one God, the God of all of creation, the God of all humanity. And so there's a movement between the two to link together the God of Israel and the God of everything, because it's not necessarily just what's in Hebrew called muvame elav, just accepted. It actually has to be proven, has to be shown that there is that connection between the two. Noah, the story of Noah really makes that connection. And that's what I want to focus on with us today. But in order to do that, I'm actually going to be beginning after the flood. All right, we're going to get starting after the flood, because the flood is a great story, but you can also, I know there's a song of the Noah, the flood, here comes the floody, floody. There are a lot of different like fun songs you could do, especially as kids. I think we kind of get all that idea of the flood, but the story of what happens right after the flood, pardon me, is I think even more powerful for understanding what that flood was really all about, but particularly in terms of Noah's connective link between the story of creation and then the story of Israel. And so with that, I'm actually now going to share. Let me just open this up a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, everybody should see this. All right. And we're going to begin with the text of chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. Okay. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fertile and increase and fill the earth. Now, I didn't highlight this in the English, but I did highlight in the Hebrew. Pru urvu umil u et haaretz. This phrase, pru urvu umil u et haaretz, is not the first time that we hear this verse. The first time is actually in the story of creation, when God creates the first human beings in Genesis 1, God says, pru urvu umil u et haaretz. By the way, at the very end of that, it says vechiv shuha, and to dominate the land, which I'm going to come back to that idea shortly. But I highlighted it because it's going to be important for thinking about this link of Noah to between Israel and the story of creation and humanity. The fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon all the birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. As with the green grasses, I give you all these. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it, but for your own lifeblood I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast of humankind too. Will I require a reckoning for human life of everyone for each other? Whoever sheds human blood, by human hands shall that one's blood be shed, for in the image of God was humankind made. I'm going to pause right there. This is I'd say very, very briefly, is what's known as the Noahide commandments. There are 7 Noahide commandments, which we're going to get to, that all of humanity is obligated to abide by. So that the Torah is primarily, as I mentioned before, the story of the Israelites and the commandments given to the Israelites. However, there is this idea that there are rules and laws that should exist for all of humanity that comes from Torah. And so this text is generally viewed as the source for what's called the 7 Noahide commandments. We're going to come back to that because that's a very important piece of the link that we're going to get to at the end. But what I really want to focus on, especially at first, is this idea that I highlighted up here of pru urvu umil u et haaretz, be fertile and increase and fill the earth. And then at the very end of this section of the Noahide commandments, it says, ve'atem pru urvu shirtzu va'aretz urvuva. Be fertile then and increase, abound on the earth and increase on it. Now, one of the main things to think about when it comes to any study of Torah is how the words are there for a purpose, for us to learn from them. And especially when there are similar phrases, but there are a few differences between the two, those differences can actually tell us something even more important, or to say, here, there's something that you should be paying attention to. So we have 2 different commands. We have pru urvu umil u et haaretz, be fertile and increase and fill the earth. Ve'atem pru urvu shirtzu va'aretz urvuva. And then be fertile then and increase, abound on the earth and increase on it. So there's a difference between these 2 commandments, which basically kind of frame the Noahide commandments. So that the idea of spreading out into the land is very much about how all of humanity shall spread out. We have these responsibilities to the world around us, and that it is our job to be able to fill this land. So understanding what that filling of this land means, I think, is very critical to understanding the link between Noah and between the creation of the world, creation of humanity, and the story of the Israelites, especially because the Israelites and the people of Israel, the Jewish people as well, are often very few in number. And because we're few in number, it seems that we're not actually being fully spread around the world. Or to put another way, that if God relied upon the Jewish people to be the ones to be spread around the world and to fill the world, we're not doing a pretty good job of it, because there's a lot of the world without Jewish people. So, what do these words mean? And understanding not just what these words mean in the context of this idea of be fruitful and multiply, but also kind of like the hidden messages behind it, give us a very detailed understanding of what humanity really is all about in both positive and also, I'd say, negative ways, and how the rules of Torah, or the teachings of Torah that we read here in Noah, but also then throughout the Torah, are applicable to all people. So here we go. Let's understand this term of Peru, be fruitful. Now, one of the main things, one of the first places that we also see of it, and not necessarily in the idea of be fruitful and multiply, is in the story of the Garden of Eden. Again, we're trying to think about the link that Noah makes between creation and then the rest of Torah. So when it comes to the Garden of Eden, we have in chapter 2, verses 16, and God commanded the humans, saying, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat. But as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. Now, when we think about the story of the Garden of Eden and of Adam and Eve eating from the tree, we talk about it as eating of the fruit from the tree. The original command does not have any mention of the word fruit. If you look at the Hebrew here, there is no mention of the word peri, which would mean fruit. Instead, we only see fruit when it comes in Genesis 3 in the interaction between Eve and the snake. Now, the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that God Hashem had made. It said to the woman, did God really say, you shall not eat of any tree of the garden? Lo tochalu mikol eitz hagan. The woman replied to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. Mi pri eitz hagan nochal. So the first introduction of the word pri is actually offered by Eve in response to what the serpent said of asking the question regarding eating of the tree. Notice that what the serpent said is more akin to what's said up here. Do not eat from the tree without the word fruit. Rather, the woman was the one who to say, Eve was the one to say, from the fruit, we're actually not supposed, we're allowed to eat from the rest of the garden, but it is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden. God said, you shall not eat of it, touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, you are not going to die, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad. Now, in the Midrash, by the way, in Jewish legends, one of the things that's often remarked about this interaction between the serpent and Eve is that the serpent kind of went through sort of a logical, maybe Socratic style of argument, showing that she misunderstood what God said. And one of those ways of seeing the misunderstanding is the fact that the word peri, the word fruit, did not appear when God spoke to Adam and Eve about what they're not allowed to eat in the garden. And that started to get the woman thinking, to get Eve thinking, well, maybe I misunderstood what God had said. And then that led to eating of the fruit. But we're going to go down a little bit. She was convinced. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they perceived that they were naked, and they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths. All right. Now, the language that's used here, which I think is very interesting in terms of What does it mean that they sew together fig leaves? The word is vayit peru ale te'ena. Vayit peru comes from the same root as pri, meaning to be as fruit. So what does it mean to sew together? It means in this regard that sowing is the action of creating something new. You take two things, right? And you take fig leaves and you join them together. By virtue of this act of sowing, you're creating something. Because eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is actually the knowledge of how to create. We can create beautiful things and we can also create destructive things. And so the whole idea behind be fruitful isn't just about that you should be as many fruit out on the like on a tree and have so many fruit that and have so many seeds and fruit. Anyway, I'm getting lost in my garden and my my vegetation metaphor. It's more the fact that fruit is what is it that you create out of your own life. Now, God has a certain response to it, but the notion of what that fruit is that you do this, you take your knowledge and you can then make something out of it. So that's the idea of Peru. Make something out of your life. It could be good or it could be bad. All right. So that's Peru. Now let's get to, I'm actually going to skip shares because that comes up a little bit later. I'm going to go to, and I don't think it's down. I skipped that over here. All right. We're going to go to Orvu, which is, I had it over here. Hold on one second. Oh, here it is. I gave you the title. Okay. So Orvu. Now, Orvu literally, it means to be great. So Rav, Resh Bet, often means like a lot or an increase, something that is really great. One of the other things that, especially as I was thinking about this and learning it, is that Rav or Reeve, another kind of version of that same root, also means to quarrel or to fight. And so I was thinking about that connection between something that is great in number and then also of quarreling. And this comes up in actually in Torah in the story after Noach, meaning in Abram's first story through Lech Lecha, that we're going to be learning next week, where we're reading next week, this idea of what the meaning of Rav and Reeve is all about. So this is the example. This comes from Genesis 13, 1 through 9. From Egypt, Abram went up into the Negev with his wife and all that he possessed, together with Lot. Now, Abram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold, and he proceeded by stages from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been formerly between Bethel and Ai, the site of the altar that he had built there at first. And there, Abram invoked Hashem, God, by name. Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support them staying together, for their possessions were so great that they could not remain together. In the Hebrew, ki haya rechusham rav, velo yachalu lashevet yachdav. So the first thing to notice is how rav here is referring to possessions, how many things you have, that you want to increase, right? That idea of Peru, you want to create, you make things, you acquire many things, you acquire many, many, many more things. And then you have so much that it's difficult to be able to live with others. Because if others have so much, how are you going to be able to live in the same place? That when people have a lot, that they tend to not remain together. Another metaphor for thinking about this, I was just actually celebrating the holiday yesterday with my kids in Philadelphia, going out. And we talked about how it was amazing to see so many people in the city, because when you go to the suburbs, it's a lot harder to do the job of the holiday, to go around to all the different houses. When you have fewer houses together, in order to be able to live like that, you have to be willing to kind of give up some element of possession, especially when it comes to space. And if you are wealthy enough that you want to have as much space as possible, you may go out to suburban life and live in a place where you have much more area that's just yourself, your privacy. Having more land, having more stuff, or I should say, having more stuff requires having more land that doesn't belong to anyone else, compared to living in a place where more people are cramped together. You're willing to give up some element of what you have much of in terms of possessions or in terms of land. And it should not be, I think it should be pretty obvious that when you have more possessions, guess what happens? And there was quarreling between the herders of Abram's cattle and those of Lot's cattle. Vayhi bein ro'e mikne Avram uvein ro'e mikne Lot. There was so much, there was Rav, that it led to quarreling, that it led to Reeve. So when you have a lot, it leads to difficulty, to arguments, to fighting. And when you want a lot, when you go out into the world and you collect a lot of things, you collect a lot of possessions, it may actually lead to greater strife. So it's great to acquire. It's a great way to express your sense of creativity from the word peri, but that sense of creativity may lead to destruction of others because of how much you have, and then the fact that it is very difficult to be able to, and it's very difficult to be able to live together with others. And in fact, what happens here is that we see below, and highlight this, Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me. Is not the whole land before you? Let us separate. If you go north, I will go south. If you go south, I will go north. So meaning, if you create and you do a lot of things, you are able to expand your mind and expand what you're able to do. You're able to acquire things, and you keep on acquiring because it's a way of expressing creativity. The only way to be able to survive is if you're able to spread out and to not necessarily be one on top of each other, which leads to the next phrase, which is sheretz. Now, one of the interesting things about the word sheretz, again, sheretz appears in the text that we have in the second mentioning of this particular command of pru orvu with Noah, right? So it's up here. And where is it over here? Right. Betzem pru orvu shirtzu va'aretz. It's instead of maleh ha'aretz, to fill up the land. I'm not going to talk about maleh, but I want to talk about shirtzu, which may be just a synonym in this regard. So shirtzu, the root of the word shirtzu is sheretz. And sheretz means to abound or to be spread out, and also to swarm, so that the things that kind of move out in great numbers are also viewed as swarming all together. And the best example of this is insects, or especially like the plague of locusts from the 10 plagues. And that's actually the word that's used in Leviticus 11, talking about insects in regards to the rules of kashrut. All the things that swarm upon the earth are an abomination. They shall not be eaten. V'chol hasheretz hashoretz al haaretz. I love Hebrew because it basically says this thing called sheretz, they're doing shertzing. They're doing shortzing. They use the same word to kind of describe the action that they do. They are swarming, and because of that, they are a sheketz. They are an abomination, and therefore you should not eat insects. You shall not eat among all things that swarm upon the earth, anything that crawls on its belly. By the way, that should also be a reference, in a way, thinking back to the curse given to the snake about crawling on its belly, eating of the dust of the earth. It seems a very negative thing. So very similar point being made here. Or anything that walks on fours, anything that has many legs, for they are an abomination. You shall not draw abominations upon yourselves through anything that swarms. You shall not make yourself impure, for I am your God, and you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not make yourselves impure through any swarming thing that moves upon the earth. Now, because this language is, for I am your God, you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, the rabbis interpret this as that there's a deeper level of spiritual impurity that comes with eating sheretz. This especially comes from Masechet Sanhedrin, in which when you eat of sheretz, sheretz is never able to become tahor, never able to become pure, and therefore you're really ingesting a lot of impurities in your own selves. So eating sheretz is like the worst thing, one of the worst things that you could do in terms of breaking kashrut, breaking kosher. Now there's a line here I'm going to touch on and here, but I'm going to bring back a little bit later. Is that you had the for I am your God, you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy. And then as well, for I am the one who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God, you shall be holy. So we have two instances of God, one as I am holy, and the second is I brought you out of Egypt. The first one could be for all peoples, and the second one is for specifically for the Israelite nation as they're coming out. I want you to hold that idea about why God is mentioned twice here as we move forward. But thus far, what I want to kind of focus on for right now is this notion of, I'm going to stop share for just a second so you can kind of see each other. You've got Peru, which is creativity. Creativity could lead to destruction, could lead to creating a lot of things. That will lead to Orvu, in which you have much. All of that muchness, all of that manyness could lead to fighting, could lead to Reeve, because you don't necessarily have a place for yourself. And so therefore you need to share it. So you need to be able to spread yourselves out in the world in order to make sure you have enough room. But things that swarm, things that kind of move around, especially are like going everywhere, could also be seen as a bit of an abomination, or could be seen in many ways as how they are antithetical to God's holiness. And in order to be able to kind of make that link a little bit more clear, we actually need to go back to the Parsha and look at the story of, and to look at the story of Babel, of the Tower of Babel. Okay? Now, before we get to Tower of Babel, at the very end of the section regarding the sons, I should say, at the beginning of the section where the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japhet, Ham being the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these, the whole world branched out. Ume'ele nafetza kol haaretz. Okay, so the word for branching out is naftza. There's a sense here, especially given the fact that it kind of just comes on the heels of Pru Orvu Umilu, Pru Orvu Vishirtsu Mina Vishirtsu Mina Aretz, that it is a way of almost saying what shirtsu is, that to spread out among the world is the same thing as to kind of like to scatter, to go everywhere. But what is that act of scattering really all about? That is to say, when we scatter, when we move throughout the world, what is the result of that? Or even more so, why is it that we have to scatter? Now, we understand from before with that idea of Orvu that perhaps we have to scatter to go many places because we have so many possessions that we feel that we can't necessarily all live together in one place. We have to spread out. But then what happens when it is that we are spreading out? And this comes from the story of the Tower of Babel, okay? And they said, come, let us build us a city. This is from Genesis 11, verses 4-9. And a tower with its top in the sky to make a name for ourselves, else we shall be scattered all over the world. Pen nafutz al penei chol haaretz. So you've got this idea of we're going to build a tower to be together as one. Otherwise, we will be scattered. So there's something very negative about being scattered that they're worried about. Hashem came down to look at the city and the tower that humanity had built, and Hashem said, if as one people with one language for all, this is how they had begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Now, in many ways, this is kind of the culmination of God's fear of humanity eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Why? Because if they ate from the tree, they'd have that desire to create. True. If they had that desire to create, they'll want to create many things, or vu. And by virtue of creating many things, they'll want to then something. And we're not sure exactly what that something is. In a sense, God's saying you're going to scatter around the world. You're going to move around the world. However, there's a fear of being apart, and that the people from the Tower of Babel, that they did not want to be apart. They did not like the idea of being scattering. So if you have a lot and you can't scatter, you can't go different places, the only way you can survive is by using all of your creative energy together to build, to work together to do something great. And so if scattering is on the horizontal axis, you could say that building and building great things is on the vertical axis going up. It's imagining that the great towers and pyramids that have been built into the world were not done by slaves, but that they were done by people who really believed in that vision of what this action could do to bring all of humanity together. So it's not control, it's about unity. And they were worried about the fact that they may be spread out. So unity can be able to bring everyone together to do something great, to build something great up to God, and God was worried about it. Let us then go down and confound their speech, so that they shall not understand one another's speech. Thus Hashem scattered, vayafetz Adonai otam, from there over the whole face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. Ironically, the people's fear about being scattered led them to become scattered by God. That when we unify, when we become all one, it is as if it's maybe getting too close to God, that we're going too far. And therefore, we need to be able to say we can't necessarily do so many things up there. We have to then be scattered out. And what happens then? That is why it was called Babel, because there Hashem confounded the speech of the whole earth. That's Babel and Balal. Balal means to confound, so those words are interconnected. And from there, Hashem scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Umisham hefitzam, same root as nafatz, Adonai al pnei chol haaretz. So this is what's happening here. You've got God saying, you have this creative energy, you want to do great things, but you can't go fully up because you're going to get too close to me, and that's not going to be okay. So I'm going to scatter you around the world so that you don't have to necessarily, you're not going to be able to go too close to me. But by virtue of scattering, what's going to happen? By virtue of scattering, you're then going to be swarming upon the earth. And what makes it even worse in many ways is because God made it so that people could not speak each other's language. And by virtue of not being able to understand each other's language, the spreading out of the world will lead to terrible things and to a lot of quarreling among nations. We think about colonialism. We think about exploration. We think about all the ways in which humanity has moved out into the world. Any of these acts in and of themselves are not necessarily wrong or evil. It's that by virtue of spreading out, we're going to come into contact with other groups of humanity that are also out in the world, but we can't speak to each other. We cannot understand one another. We don't know each other's language. We don't know each other's customs. And that's going to make it difficult, not just for us to unite, but for us to get along. And perhaps the reason why the word sheretz appeared in the second version of pru or vu umilu is because it's almost as if to say, by virtue of your scattering, you're then going to have difficulty getting along with one another. And therefore, you have to be careful of that. So what do we do in that case? How do we deal with this issue of how we don't get along? And this is going to be the last 10 minutes, and really will make the link between Noah and how the story of Noah, not just telling about the challenges that humanity has, but how we'll be able to resolve them through learning more of Torah, even though the more of Torah is related to a specific story, specific experience of a unique people, as opposed to a story of humanity. So for this, I want to come back to the text from, I got this right? Okay. The text from that we did not really read before, but now I want to kind of hone in on it. I mentioned before the first two verses here because it talks about the idea of the world branching out. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japhet, Ham being the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these, the whole world branched out. So I talked about that before. But now I'm bringing you back to learn a bit more. but to focus on this person, Ham being the father of Canaan. V'cham hu avi Canaan. It is very odd that Noah has three sons, and that in describing the three sons, the Torah seeks to explain who Ham is the father of in that statement, and that the other two sons we do not give who they are the father of. Meaning we want that there's some special reason why the Torah is teaching us that Ham is the father of Canaan. So what is that thing that it's teaching us? These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole world branched out. Noah, the tiller of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth, placed it against both their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way, so that they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke up from his wine and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves, shall he be to his brothers." Okay. It's a very odd story. We could spend a lot of time kind of parsing it, but here's the main thing I want to take away. The fact that Ham, being the father of Canaan, does something that in the minds of Noah is seen to be a terrible thing is important for thinking about how the story of Abram and the rest of the Israelite people is about Canaan being their home. That is to say the following. It is by virtue of the moral turpitude of Ham, who uncovered his father's nakedness, which according to Leviticus 18 is a toeva, is an abomination, that by virtue of committing that moral sin, that later on, not only is he going to be cursed, but then, as we read at the very end of this Torah portion, leading into the next Torah portion of Lech Lecha with Abram going into Canaan, it says, Terach took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and they set out together from Ur the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. In other words, they're on their way to Canaan, which, as we're going to read to next week, is the land that God is promising to Abram and his progeny, is the land that is at the focus of the entire story of the rest of the Torah, as it's about, here we are, this is our land, we get kicked out, now we're slaves, we want to go back to the land to become free, and the only reason we are allowed to spread out into that land is because of the moral turpitude of the people who were there beforehand. If it wasn't for their moral turpitude, we could not have that land. We could not be allowed to scatter that land, into that land, which is to say that the only way for us as human beings, let alone the Israelite nation here, to be able to do great things in the world is if we have a strong moral basis for how to be able to do the right thing. Hence, we must have commandments that will guide us so we don't do terrible things. That's why I think that Noahide commandments, which is sort of the section that was framed by these two phrases, pru or vu, is found here because it's saying in order for you to be scattered around the world, you must have a foundational moral basis in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, you will do terrible things. Okay. That's the main message. But I want to focus a little bit to wrap up on some of those Noahide commandments, but in particular about how the rabbis understand what those Noahide commandments are. Because what they don't do is they don't go into the text of Noah in order to be able to show you what those commandments are. They pull them from seemingly other places. In fact, according to Maimonides, who writes here Mishnah Torah, Kings and Wars, 6 precepts were commanded to Adam: the prohibition against worship of false gods, the prohibition against cursing God, the prohibition against murder, the prohibition against incest and adultery, the prohibition against theft, the command to establish laws and courts of justice. And then there's one more, which is the prohibition against eating flesh from a living animal was added for Noah, as Genesis 9:4 states, Nevertheless, you may not eat flesh with its life, which is its blood. Thus, there are these 7 mitzvot. So we don't necessarily get them from the text of Noah, and they're not necessarily clearly laid out. In fact, Maimonides doesn't get it all from his understanding of Torah. He gets it from an interpretation of the 7 commandments from Masechet Sanhedrin, which is a tractate of Talmud. And this is what the tractate says about the Noahide commandments. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters the Noahide mitzvot derived? Rabbi Yochanan says, it is from that which the verse states, and the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat from it, for on the day that you eat from it you shall die. The verses interpreted homiletically as follows. With regard to the term and commanded, these are the courts of judgment. And so it states in another verse, for I have known him to the end that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice. From Genesis 18:19. Now, this is a very specific way that rabbis come up with commandment. They say, here is a verse in Torah. This is what that verse teaches us. And we know this verse teaches us because of another command in Torah. But look at the sources it's talking about. One, it talks about, obviously, Adam. And we know from Maimonides that the 7 quote unquote Noahide commandments are related back to what Adam had said. But in order to understand what those commandments are, you need to go to Genesis 18, which is part of the story of the Jewish people, or part of the story of the Israelite nation. In other words, we don't really understand what these commandments are unless we learn more about the story of the Israelites and how God commanded them. And it's only by virtue of that larger story about this unique people that will help us understand the reasoning behind these commandments that are incumbent upon all people to do, so that we do not, in a very negative way, spread too much of the land. And I know that we're coming up to time, so I just want to end with this one, which I think is important for thinking about this idea and picking up on when I shared before about how there was one command, I forget exactly where it was, where it said, you should do this because the Lord had commanded it, and also because the Lord took you out of Egypt, kind of combining just a moral command with also the specific command for the Israelites. Take a look at this one. God, this alludes to idol worship. So it states, you shall have no other gods before me. Exodus 22. That means that people should not be bowing down to idols, because God said specifically to the Israelites, you shall not have idols. It really has nothing to do with the people, with the entire world. That command has only to do with the Israelites, and yet the rabbis are interpreting that command as being relevant for the entire world. And so at the core of what this is all about is to say, as you continue learning this year, regardless of your background, regardless of where you are in your own journey, spiritual journey, Jewish journey, wherever journey you're on, it's that even though we're going to be reading the story of a particular people, this particular people has that all these commands, all of these teachings are there to help us understand what does it really mean to be a good person. Because the Noahide commandments, that little section in which we don't really even view the commandments as coming from them, but that kind of hint at this idea that in order for us to be able to spread out into the world and not to negatively destroy each other, but to positively uplift each other, there are these basic commands that will help us be able to do it. And in order to understand those commands, we have to understand the story of the Israelites as God took us out of Egypt, because that will give us an understanding and a deep recognition of what it really means to be good people, regardless of what our backgrounds may be.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you so much. You posed some wonderful theological questions in this 45 minutes of universalism and particularism, the function of diaspora, good and evil, free will and predestination, and so many more. In the comments, you'll see that there's a lot of questions about, can we have more time? So Rabbi, if you have a way that people can stay in touch with you, please feel free to put that in the chat. Before we leave, I know you sort of left us with something to think about. I've been asking our teachers before we head out to leave folks here with either a closing thought or, even better, a bracha, a blessing as we go into Shabbat. So if you'll forgive me for putting you on the spot there,
That's okay.
we would love that.
Sure. I will actually say that it's a very simple bracha. I saw it today. Didn't have a chance to say it as I saw it, but was taking my kids to the bus, and it was a beautiful sky. Anytime I see a beautiful sky, I feel a deep connection to that which is greater, and to know that all of us are a part of something that is beyond our comprehension, and yet we feel is true in our own bones. And so the blessing you're supposed to recite when you see something beautiful happening around you is Baruch Ata Adonai Oseh Ma'aseh V'Reshit. Blessed are you, God, who is the maker of creation. Creation is what's there for all of us. Doesn't matter what one's faith background is. It is that moment that started the entire Torah and that we're still trying to understand by virtue of the stories that we are reading, by virtue of understanding how a story of one people can really be a universal story, can speak to all, to know that we have certain obligations that we must follow if we're going to be creative, be able to be great, and to be able to spread ourselves out into the world around us in doing more good than harm, is to understand that there is a moment, that there is a creator who created us out of love and who reminds us of the beauty of creation every time we see something that is beautiful. And so in honor of that moment this morning, in honor of our moments here together, would like to say, Baruch Ata Adonai, Oseh Ma'aseh V'Reshit.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you all for being here. Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom. Take care.